Hello, everyone, and welcome to the third session in American English Live Teacher Development Series 8. My name is Lauren, and I'll be with you today along with my colleague behind the scenes, Amy, who will be serving as moderator to help answer your questions and respond to your comments during the session. Today, our host, Kate, will be talking with our presenter, Amanda Hilliard, about creating authentic, communicative learning experiences using experiential learning. So let's get started.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another wonderful session of American English Live. My name is Kate, and we're so happy to have each of you here with us today. So let's begin with these great comments from participants during our last webinar. So our first comment is from Micah T. This is so fun. I can see students loving these activities. Thanks for that great comment. And our next comment is from Joan J. Thank you very much for this session. I would like to try these activities that encourage students to appreciate and love reading and English at the same time. And finally, from Sheridan C. Wonderful presentation. Many strategies are introduced for the students to learn considering different individuals. Truly, it creates a thinking classroom. This is fun. Everyone is welcome and heard in the class. Knowledge is cultivated. Great. Thank you guys so much. We love to see you actively engaged in professional development, and we encourage you to continue sharing your comments, and we hope to be able to share them with our viewers in the next session. Continue to participate with us and share your photos and comments from American English Live sessions by emailing them to americanenglishwebinars@fhi360.org or by sharing them on social media. If you share on social media, be sure to tag us at American English for Educators, and we'll make sure to hopefully share one of your photos or comments during the next session. So here's, today is our third session in American English Live Teacher Development Series 8. So far, we've explored sessions related to the themes of teaching reading in the EFL classroom. Now we'll explore the themes of communicative language teaching, fun and varied approaches for common grammar topics. And then later we'll do pair and group work to encourage student-to-student interaction. We hope you're able to use the practical ideas we share. Have you had a favorite session so far? Please let us know in the chat box. And here's a bit about what to expect today. Each session is about 60 minutes long and is often related to an American English eTeacher Massive Open online course or to a Teacher's Corner theme on the American English website. The presenter will present the material, and I, as your host, will ask questions and make comments as well. But we really hope to hear from you, our audience, so please share your questions, ideas, and experiences in the chat box. When our session comes to a close in about an hour, you'll have an opportunity to receive a digital badge for your participation. At the end of the session, we'll share a link in the comments and at the top of this post. Click on that link and complete a short quiz about today's session. You must answer 2 out of 3 multiple choice questions correctly, and once you've successfully done so, you should expect to receive your badge via email from badger@badger.io in about a week. And we're excited to announce the opening of another wonderful eTeacher Massive Open online course. Join this free MOOC to develop a working understanding of culture and explore tools for analyzing, understanding, and negotiating cultural differences. In this course, you will prepare to implement culture and critical thinking lessons by examining relevant example activities and considering options for evaluating student progress in these areas. This course is open from June 1st through August 24th, 2020. To learn more and enroll, visit the link shared both on the screen and in the comments. And now for today's session, students bringing grammar to life with experiential learning. Students often study grammar for years, yet still have difficulty with it in real-world contexts. An experiential approach to grammar can address this issue by enabling students to use language in many different real-life situations. In this session, we will explore how experiential learning provides authentic, real-world communicative context for using specific grammar points, and examine practical, creative activities for bringing grammar to life that can be tailored for different class sizes and learners of different ages or proficiency levels. And now we're pleased to introduce our presenter, Amanda Hilliard. With over a decade of experience, Amanda has taught English in the Republic of Korea, Vietnam, Ecuador, Tanzania, and Hungary, and in the United States in the states of Georgia, Texas, and Arizona. Currently, she works as an ESL instructor at Arizona State University and a TEFL certificate instructor at International TEFL Academy. Previously, she served as a U.S. Department of State English Language Fellow in Hue, Vietnam. Amanda received her master's in TESOL in 2011 and her PhD in Applied Linguistics in 2017 from the University of Birmingham in England. Her research focuses on action research for English language teachers. Welcome, Amanda. We're so happy to have you here with us today.
Hi, Kate, and thank you for the excellent introduction. I'm really happy to be with you here today as well. Now, I don't know about our audience. Personally, I really love teaching grammar. I think it's really fun. I love to see the students using English grammar in my class. But I know that not all teachers feel like this. Not everyone is as excited about grammar as I am. So I hope by the end of today's session, you'll get some ideas for how you can make grammar a little bit more exciting and a little bit more useful for your students in your class. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started with the next slide. Yes. Okay, so before we start talking about grammar, I want to give you a little scenario. So imagine that you want to learn how to play basketball. Which method below would you choose? Would you read a book about the rules of basketball? Would you watch a video of a basketball game? Would you just talk to someone about their favorite basketball team? Or would you get a ball and go practice on the court with your friend?
All right, what do you think, everybody? Which of these methods would you choose to learn how to play basketball? Would you read a book? Would you watch a video? Which one would you choose? So let's see, I'm seeing a lot of people who are saying that they would choose D, get a ball and practice on the court with their friends. I'm seeing that from Celine, from Kathy, let's see, from Yosh, from Adam. Yeah, so lots and lots of people are choosing D. What do you think, Amanda?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, I see a lot of B's without thinking. B for sure. Yeah, so when it comes to a physical activity like a sport, riding a bike, we know that it's necessary to go do it. We can't really expect to be able to play basketball just by reading or just by talking about it. But when it comes to grammar, we don't always take this kind of approach. Sometimes we just talk about it, or sometimes we just think about it, but we don't actually use it. So I think today we'll see how we can take the same kind of approach to learning basketball that we might take. We take the same approach for learning grammar. Let's take a look at the next slide. So some goals of this session today. And the first goal is to understand experiential learning and how it can be applied to English language teaching. We will also acknowledge some advantages and challenges of using experiential learning in the classroom. We will try to build understanding of the experiential learning cycle, and we will learn and apply a 4-step process to creating experiential learning lessons that you can adjust for many different activities. Okay, so let's take a look at the next slide. The first thing we need to think about is, what is experiential learning? To put it simply, experiential learning just means learning by doing. As you can see, it's a very old concept. If you look at this first quote from Aristotle in 350 BC, he said, for the things we have to learn before we can do them, we learn by doing them. More recently, in the 1930s, Dewey really emphasized the connection between education and personal experience. So without personal experience, it will be difficult for the students to learn. And in 1984, Kolb, who is really influential with the topic of experiential learning, developed a kind of cycle. So it starts by formulating a hypothesis with active experimentation. After that, the students would try it out, see what happens with the concrete experience. After the experience, they would reflect on it and then connect more ideas with abstract conceptualization. Now, this theory is influential in education in general. So it's used with many different subjects and many different fields. But we're just focused on experiential learning for English language teaching and for grammar more specifically. So let's take a look at an experiential learning cycle that's just for EFL or ESL students. So here is a model that was developed by Konderman in 2000. So it has the same kind of idea of the 4 different phases, 4 different steps. And the first one is the exposure phase, which is when students prepare to learn, to prepare for an activity. The second phase is participation phase, which is when students actually do the activity. The third phase is the internalization phase, when they reflect on how the activity went. And then the last phase is dissemination or transfer phase, when they apply the new language they learned to other situations. Let's take a look at each phase in a little more detail. So this is just the theory part of our presentation. So let's start with the first phase. Phase 1 is the exposure phase. This is when we prepare the students to do the experiential activity. So you might have, for example, a warm-up where you activate background schema, past experiences, and our prior knowledge. You might explain the activity objectives to the students or help them set individual goals. Or you might teach them important vocabulary or grammar. So this is to prepare them for the participation phase. That's the next one. Yes, so in the second phase, the participation phase, the students are actually doing the activity. So they engage in experience with activity using their English skills. In the next phase, phase 3, we have internalization phase. That's when the students reflect. They can reflect on the experience of the activity. They can think about their feelings or about the language that they just learned from doing the activity. And the last phase, phase 4, is when they apply. And they can link the classroom learning with the real world. So far this has been kind of theory. Let's think about your own classes with the next slide. I want you to pause and reflect. Think about your own classes. How often do you incorporate these 4 phases into activities? So maybe you do a lot of preparation and doing things, but maybe you don't have as much reflection or much application. How often are you incorporating these 4 phases into your classroom?
What do you think, everyone? How often are you incorporating these phases? Prepare, do, reflect, and apply. What do you think? We'd love to hear some of your comments about this. How often do you, so we see lots of people saying different things. So Takumi says sometimes, Yasu says always, Lotus only sometimes, Victor hardly. Lots of nice adverbs of frequency being used here. How often do you use? Let's see some responses here on social media. Let's see. We have very limited time in teaching grammar, so sometimes we integrate with other skills, from Jacqueline. Love Benavida says every day because we have meeting time after each lesson. Let's see. I try to include all 4 phases in every lesson. When time won't allow it, continues to the next lesson, from Tessa. So great responses, everybody. Thanks for sharing.
Yeah, so it sounds like some of you are already using a lot of these phases, which is great, but maybe some of you said seldom or only sometimes. So hopefully you'll get some ideas about how you can incorporate all 4 activities into your classes. Great, let's take a look at a specific example just to make the theory a little bit clearer. So I want to show you these 4 phases using a restaurant role play, an activity that you guys have probably used in your classes before. And I told you the technical term for each of the phases, but from here on out, I'm just going to use the simple verbs: prepare, do, reflect, and apply. So we're thinking about a role play. The first thing you do is you prepare the students. So let's take a look at what that might look like. So when I'm preparing the students, I might do things like give a warm-up to activate background schema. I might teach important vocabulary or grammar. I might have the students read a restaurant dialogue. And there's many other activities that you could do as well, such as watching a video of a customer talking to a waiter in a restaurant. So these are just some ideas of what I might do. Let's see what this could look like in class when you're doing the role play. So I might start with a simple warm-up. I could have students discuss some questions in pairs, like do you eat out often? What's your favorite restaurant? When was the last time you ate at a restaurant, or what did you order? So this will get them starting to think about the topic of going to a restaurant or ordering in a restaurant. After that, I might have them do something like this. So here I have 3 directions on the board, but I would probably just do each one at a time. So first I have the students read the dialogue out loud with a partner twice, so they can read both the waiter and the customer and get used to the kind of language they might need to use to do the role play later. After that, to focus on some grammar, I might have them circle the modals, discuss why we might use can or would or could in these situations. And then I might have them read the dialogue again, replacing the underlined words so they could order, instead of hamburger and french fries, maybe they order a pizza, so that they're starting to get used to changing up the dialogue. That's going to really help them to do the dialogue in the second phase. Okay, let's move on to phase 2. So in the second phase, that's do, the students actually do the activity. In this case, they would practice the restaurant role play. Let's take a look at what that might look like in your class. So I might give students a simple menu. Here I have starters, entrees, desserts, and drinks. And I might write some key phrases on the board just to help them during the role play, but I let them do it as a spontaneous activity so that they can practice their conversation skills. I would probably have them do the role play several times so that they have different partners and get a chance to be both the waiter and the customer. So this is the second phase when they're actually doing the activity. Let's take a look now at step 3. Phase 3 is when they reflect. So in this case, after the role play, instead of just finishing the class, students might discuss how the role play went or their feelings during the role play, or they might think about the language that they learned during the class. There's many different options. Let's look at an example. So I might have students do a think, pair, share, where they reflect on the activity. So first they might think to themselves for a minute or two. What did you like about the activity? How was it similar to the last time you ordered food in a restaurant? How was it different? What was difficult about ordering, or how did you feel during the role play? After that, they discuss with a partner, and we share some ideas with the class, maybe putting some ideas on the board as well. You can see, for example, with question 2, it's connecting to their previous experiences, and it's also thinking about their feelings, the new things that they learned during the role play. Let's move on to step 4. The last phase is apply. So this is when students apply what they learned to different situations. So they might plan how to order food in real life, or they might think about how they could do things differently to improve on the role play that they just did. Let's look at an example. So I might, now that they practice with the menu that I gave them, I might ask the students to find a real menu for their favorite restaurant online. Imagine you're ordering food, write down 5 specific things you would say when ordering. This will help them transfer the new language and grammar that they learned to a new situation, because they've already thought about what they would say in a different situation. So it will help them apply what they learned in the classroom outside of the class as well. Okay, let's move on. So I know you might not be ready for a quiz, but we have pop quiz for you. So we just went through the 4 phases. We start with prepare, do, reflect, and apply. So imagine your students are doing a role play for shopping at a market. In which phase would the students think about what went well or didn't go well?
Okay, what do you think, everybody? So imagine your students are doing a role play for shopping at a market. Which phase would students think about what went well or didn't go well? I'm seeing lots of great responses come in. I'm gonna give just a minute to make sure everybody has a chance to think about it and respond. Let's see which of these phases. Okay, great. I'm seeing Gowrie say reflect. Jihad say phase 3, Rosemary as well, Mia, Adam, Zusing. Michelle says apply, so interesting. Let's see. Carl says 3, Lots and lots of people are saying 3, reflect. Are they correct, Amanda?
Well, let's see. Can we see the answer? Yes, this one is going to be reflect. I know some of you put apply. Reflect, I think about the activity that we just did, and apply, I'm thinking about using it for a different situation. So maybe using the language for a different role play or for different situations. So this one is going to be reflect. I think about how activity went. Okay, let's move on to the next one. Okay, same situation. Imagine your students are doing a role play for shopping at a market. In which phase would they participate in the role play?
All right, what do you think, everybody? In which phase would they actually participate in the role play? Would it be prepare, do, reflect, or apply? What do you think? I want to give just a second to see here. In which phase would they participate? Prepare, do, reflect, or apply? All right, great. I'm seeing lots of people say number 2, do the activity. Asma, Asim, Lizzie, Lucy, Kulian, let's see, Ezra, Pamela, great. All right, thanks for your responses, everybody. Are they correct, Amanda?
Let's see the answer. Yes, of course. This is the one where they're actually doing activities. So the activity is going to the market, pretending to be shopping. They're doing the activity here. Okay, let's look at the next one. Okay, same situation. Imagine your students are doing a role play for shopping at a market. In which phase would they learn some new vocabulary and grammar?
All right, in which phase would we have them learn new vocabulary and grammar? Let's see, I'm seeing lots of answers come in, but I want to make sure everybody has a minute to think about it. Let's see, okay. It looks like lots of people are saying number 1, prepare. Sassy, Cindy, Hane, Thelma, let's see, Jordan, Huda, Hyacinth. Awesome. I think a lot of people think this is the prepare phase. Are they correct, Amanda?
Let's see. Yes, this is definitely prepare. I did see that some of you were putting apply. Prepare, I'm preparing them, so that's when they learn the really new vocabulary and grammar. And in apply, you could review it. So if they have some mistakes in reflect or apply, you could review it. But this one, they're learning the new grammar to prepare them for the activity. Let's look at the last one. Okay, same situation. In which phase would your students consider how to use the new language in their next visit to the market?
Okay, what do you think? When are they going to think about how to use this in the next instance that they need to? Okay, I see a lot of responses, and I think we're seeing a consensus that it is number 4 from Dawn, from Hawaii, from Hyacinth. A lot of people are saying this is the apply phase. Jean Ponce, Andrea, Ted, Kathy, Helen, Maritere, Paula. Wonderful, great responses, everybody. Thank you for sharing.
Yes, okay, so here they're applying what they learned in the class to a situation outside of the class. So they're thinking about how to use it for their next visit to the market. You guys did great. So I know that we know the theory, we get an idea of the 4 different steps. Let's take a look at the next slide. So now we've talked about the 4 different steps. We've seen an example with the restaurant role play, and you guys practiced with the role play to the supermarket, to the market. So I want to know about you. What do you think are some benefits of using experiential learning with your students in your classroom?
Great question. What are some benefits of using experiential learning? We want to hear from you, everybody. So let's see, Mirka says this is learning grammar by discovery. Nice. Let's see. This helps us to have collaborative task-based learning from Ronilo. And learners love role play. Just a nice comment about that previous activity from Marcel. Learning by doing. Sunbeam says they're able to engage in different activities. Learners become more effective. Students remember better from IPEC. Takami says students are motivated. Asma says they can apply the rules of grammar in real life situations. Hertude says that we can have more lively classes and the students will be more interested in the topic. Great, excellent responses, everybody. Thanks so much for sharing.
Yeah, I think you guys are reading my mind because you took some of the same ideas that I have. Let's take a look at the next slide. So some benefits of using experiential learning, as you guys mentioned, it can be really motivating. It can create positive self-image and confidence for our students because they know that they can use the grammar in real life. With the reflection step, it can lead to deeper learning and self-awareness. It can improve other skills. So in addition to language skills, a lot of experiential learning involves things like group work or problem solving. So they can work on their communication skills, group work, or critical thinking skills. It helps students transfer language skills to the real world, so they should be able to use the grammar outside of the class as well. And I saw some of you mentioning already things like task-based learning. So it's compatible with many other approaches. So it can be used with approaches that you're already doing in class, like task-based learning, project-based learning, service learning, a communicative language teaching approach. So using this cycle is really compatible with many other approaches that you're probably already using. Let's take a look at the next slide. So now we talked about all the good things. I want to know what would be some challenges of using experiential learning for you and your students?
Yeah, what do you think, everybody? We've talked about the benefits. Now let's chat about the challenges. What are some challenges that you can foresee with using experiential learning in your classroom? All right, it can be time consuming. Let's see what else. Maybe the students will start to speak off topic. It might be hard to make sure that they're staying focused on the skills and language that you're focused on. You might have lack of time to complete all 4 steps from Tessa. It might take too much time from Han. It might be hard to manage. Oh, Laura says maybe the students' abilities might be different, so it might be important to differentiate, which can always be challenging. Let's see, one more. Maybe helping students to get used to the experience also might be a challenge if this is something new for your classroom. So thanks for those great responses, everybody.
Yeah, of course. Again, you guys are reading my mind. Let's take a look at the next slide. So a lot of you mentioned that it takes more time. Definitely takes more class time because you're adding some reflection and you're making sure that they can link what they learned in class to the outside world. So it might take more time, but if it leads to deeper learning, maybe that's a good trade-off. It does require some training for teachers. You're already in the training today, so you're already getting your training, but for some people who are not used to this approach, it could require a little bit of adjustment for the teachers. I saw already in the chat box a question about assessment, so you might need to use different types of assessment, especially if you're doing role plays or project work. You can't just have a multiple choice assessment. I'll show you a little bit later on an example of how you could assess one of these activities. And then a lot of experiential learning, it doesn't have to, but a lot of it involves group or pair work. So if your students are not used to that, or you don't feel comfortable doing a lot of group or pair work, that can be a little bit difficult as well. Yes, someone mentioned collaborative learning can be a benefit rather than a challenge, of course, but it can be a little bit difficult if your students are not used to this kind of approach. Getting them used to working in pairs or groups, getting them used to doing this kind of approach can be a bit of an adjustment. Okay, let's look at the next slide. So I promise we're about to get into 2 examples. I'm going to show you how to make a lesson plan with experiential learning. But before we do that, I want to give you some quick teaching tips that you can think about as we're going through the lesson plans. So the first one, make your objectives clear. So we just mentioned that students might not be used to this approach. If you make your objectives clear and they understand why they're doing the activity, they're more likely to participate and to get more out of your activity. Second one, create a comfortable environment for the students. They're likely to be making some mistakes when they're doing the activity, and you might want to review some of those mistakes later in the reflection stage. So make sure that the students are friendly and supportive of each other. You need an environment where they're ready to participate and make mistakes. The third tip, use relevant, real, and engaging activities. During the presentation, I'll tell you many times that the important part of experiential learning is the experience. So really you need to focus on that second stage to develop a really nice activity that's going to give a good experiential learning activity. Number 4 is similar. Choose appropriate activities for your students. So make sure you're considering the students' goals or motivations for taking the class. Things like proficiency level can be important as well. Number 5, when possible, try to give learners some choice and autonomy. If they have some control over the activity, again, they're more likely to participate and to get more out of the activity. Number 6, involve the whole person, including their senses, feelings, and personalities. So with experiential learning, it's not just about the language, but also about their experience. And number 7, be sure to include opportunities for reflection. The reflection can lead to much deeper learning so that they can apply it to situations outside your classroom. Now, before we look at some examples, I wanted to tell you a few other things. So for today's webinar, we're going to be starting with the grammar and creating an activity that matches the grammar. But of course, depending on the class you're teaching, you might just start with activity. For example, if I'm teaching an English for specific purposes class, like a business English class, I might start by thinking about the activity, like I want students to be able to do a job interview. And that might be the stage 2, and I develop the grammar and language around that. I'm also showing you today lessons that are just for one class, but I do want you to keep in mind, as some people mentioned already in the comments, that you can do experiential learning over several class days. So if you have a longer project, you might break it up into smaller steps, and the experiential learning could be more than just one lesson. Okay, with those 2 caveats, let's take a look at an example.
Could I really quickly just want to share a nice question we got from Nick. Let's see. Would your objective in these teaching tips, would your objective be focused on the grammar point or being successful in the experience?
I would say they definitely go together. So I'll show you an example. At the end of this example, you'll see the whole lesson plan. But the objective, I usually try to include both. So for example, with the restaurant role play, I might have an objective like we're going to use modals to politely order food in a restaurant. So it includes both the language that I want them to learn and also the situation that they should be able to use it in. So I think both are definitely important.
Wonderful. Thanks for that response.
Thanks for the question. Okay, now let's try creating a lesson plan together. So let's take a look at the next slide. I want to remind you that we have the 4 steps. We start with prepare, do, reflect, and apply. Now, these are the steps that you're going to have in the lesson, but when you're planning the lesson, I recommend that you start with step 2. The reason is because in experiential learning, experience is the most important part. So you really need to start by creating a good activity, and then you can prepare the other materials around the activity. So we're going to start with step 2, then we'll go back and prepare with step 1, and then we'll do 3 and 4. So I'm going to show you like I would plan the lesson. Let's take a look at the next slide. So as I said, the first thing you want to start with is the activity. What is going to be the experience that you want the students to have? You want to think about the grammar point. How is it used in real life? In which situations would people use this grammar point? So for example, here we have imperatives, imperative verbs, or commands. There's many different uses in real life. I might use them to give directions or instructions, maybe to give some orders to my students. I might advise or request my students to do or not do something in class. So you just want to choose one of those. So I chose giving directions and instructions. And there's many different activities you can use. So remember, this is like a framework that you can use with many different activities. Here, I'm going to show you the example of writing and following a recipe. So let's look at the next slide. So this is the activity that I created for my students. It says I've brought in ingredients for making a salad. So I've brought in maybe some vegetables, some fruit. With a partner, choose your ingredients and write the steps for your salad below. So first, they're going to use the English to choose their ingredients. They write the directions with the imperative verbs. And then at the end, they're going to make it together in pairs. So they're actually creating the recipe and then doing the recipe as well. Let's take a look at the next slide. So this one is writing a recipe and making the recipe. I wonder what you think. What makes this activity an experiential learning activity?
Okay, so with this activity, we're writing and following a recipe. What do you think? Why does this activity qualify to be an experiential learning activity? What do you think? What makes this activity experiential? So let's see. It provides a real life situation. Christy says that they are doing something, they're participating. Let's see. It could be real life from Julie as well. They prepare the recipe, so they're doing something, they're involved. Love Benavides says, we did a similar activity. We made an egg salad sandwich. Let's see. It involves learning by doing from Umair. So wonderful responses, everyone. Thank you for sharing.
Excellent. Let's take a look at the next slide. You guys got it head on. So remember, experiential learning means learning by doing. In this case, students are using their English to write the recipes, and then they actually make the food. So they're doing something using the English. So this is our activity. Now I told you after the activity, we'll go back to the preparation phase and think about preparing some materials for the students. So let's look at the next slide. So now that I have my activity, then I can go back and I can prepare the phase one. I want to think about what students will need to know to complete the activity and prepare some pre-activity materials or practice. Again, there's so many different things you can do. I'm just showing you a few ideas here. You might have the students read a recipe or watch a short cooking video so they have a model for the activity later. You could review key vocabulary, phrases, or grammar. You could have the students act out a recipe or practice filling in the verbs in a recipe first. Again, this would help them have a model and help them see how to use the imperative verbs so that they can write their own recipes later. I'm going to show you two examples here. Let's take a look at the next slide. And the first thing I want to do is I have a warm-up. So here's an example to activate students' background knowledge about cooking and recipes. I have them say whether they agree or disagree with these statements. Like, I like cooking, I always follow a recipe when cooking, I like trying new ingredients and recipes, or I'm a good cook. Then they discuss with a partner, and we might discuss with the class as well. This just gets them thinking about the topic of cooking and recipes so that it can lead into the next part of the lesson. Let's see the next part. So in the next part, I might introduce some vocabulary. And again, I can also start focusing on those verbs so that I focus on those imperatives. So I might put some of the vocabulary on the board and have students act it out. I could introduce some of the verbs with pictures. And again, I might focus and remind them about which kind of verb form they need when they're giving directions. So I'm starting to think about the grammar as well here. After that, I might have them do an activity like this. So I have an example recipe here. It's going to be a good model for their own recipes later. So I have ingredients, then I have directions, and they fill in the directions with the imperative verbs so that they're practicing and they get an idea of which verb form they need to use when they're doing their recipes. Okay, so now we have prepare and we have do. Let's take a look at the next part of my lesson plan. So after that, I've prepared the students and we've done the activity. I want to think about what comes after the activity. Add a review or reflection task to help students solidify the grammar point. I might review student mistakes or grammar from the activity, have them think about what went well or didn't go well, connect it to their past experiences cooking and using recipes, or have them think about new language that they learned. I'm just going to show you an example with the new language that they learned. Let's take a look at the next slide. Okay, I want you to be my student. So imagine in our class, we already did the warm-up, we learned some vocabulary and we practiced with that recipe worksheet. And then you and your partner got together, you wrote your recipe and created your salad. So imagine that you're my students. How would you answer the question below? What new language did you learn while writing your recipes?
Okay, let's put our student caps on, everybody. What new language did you learn while writing your recipe? Imagine that you have just completed the recipe writing activity. So what new language did you learn while writing your recipe? Let's see, vocabulary about different foods, cooking vocabulary, action words from Sassy, maybe
Great.
Imperatives, time order from Benjamin, verbs, ingredients, systems of measurement, action and instructions to follow and cook from Rocio. I learned how to use commands and imperatives from Huda. And I learned the structure of step-by-step from Anjo. Great, wonderful. Thanks for sharing, everybody.
Excellent. So I imagine that my students might have response something like this. Let's take a look at the next slide. So as you guys mentioned, some of you guys mentioned the verbs and imperatives, some mentioned measurements, ingredients. So what we might do is after the activity, we could create a word wall that looks like this. The students come up with some of the new words that they learn and we put it on the wall so that they can see it every day when they come to class and remember about the activity that we've done. Also, when we're doing the word wall, we can again emphasize the verbs and talk about the different forms that we used so that they remember that we used imperatives in giving the commands and writing the directions for the recipe. So that was step 3. So far we've prepared the students, we've done the activity, and we had them reflect on the new language that they learned. Let's go to step 4. So the last step is to link the classroom learning to the real world. As with the other steps, there's many different things that you could do. You might have students reflect on how they could use this imperatives in real life. You might have them reflect on how they could apply it to a different situation. You could ask the students to plan what they will do in a real life situation so that they can more easily transfer it to a situation outside of the classroom. Let's take a look at my example. Here's an activity I prepared to go with the recipe. So they made their salad. So now I want them to think about their favorite recipe, write 3 ingredients that they would use, think about the cooking verbs, the imperatives, and write down 3 steps. So rather than writing a whole recipe, they're trying to think about a couple of steps that they would use and how they can use the imperatives and the vocabulary that they used in their recipe to write their salad recipe to make a new recipe. How would I use it in a different recipe? Okay, let's take a look at the next slide. So now we've gone through all the different stages. So this is how my lesson plan would look at the end. So my objective is students will be able to use imperative verbs to write and follow a recipe. And as we had the question earlier, here I have both the grammar and the situation. So I like to put both of those in the objective because I want them to use the English and also to use it for a specific situation. The materials, I had the worksheet with the fill-in-the-blank recipes, vegetables or utensils for making salads, and then I have my 4 steps here. So I have a warm-up, introduce the vocabulary and fill-in-the-blanks recipe worksheet to prepare the students. In the second stage, they write and follow the recipes, they share, maybe eat a little bit of the food in class. After that, they're going to reflect on the new language that they learned to create a word wall that will go up in the classroom as a reminder of the activity for future days. And at the end, they're applying what they learned by writing 3 other ingredients and 3 other steps for a different recipe, sharing with the partner and maybe with the whole class. So although I started planning with step 2, you can see we have all 4 steps here for my final lesson plan. Okay, let's take a look at the next slide. Now, I know we already had some questions about assessment. So let's imagine that you're doing this recipe writing and making activity in class. Then let's think about how could you assess the students during this activity? What would you do to assess them?
What do you think, everybody? How would you assess them? We've had a few different questions about assessment. And so we'd like to hear from you on your ideas about how you might assess students during this activity. So what do you think? Let's see here. Using rubrics, great idea. Rubrics again from Mari Carr. Rubrics are a great tool for assessing and you can create your own criteria. We're seeing a lot of people talk about how they love this idea. Let's see. Joanne says, use a rubric because this is a performance-based activity. They could do peer assessment from Basma. Students could record their own cooking shows. That's a nice idea from Nick, and then maybe do some reflection activities. And many, many other people are saying rubrics, let's see, self-evaluation, observation checklist from Sassy. And students can be asked to share each step with the whole class. They could give a presentation with rubrics from Parul. So great, wonderful responses, everybody.
Okay, let's take a look at the next slide. You guys took my idea. So here I'm just showing you how you can use a rubric. Here I might just evaluate their recipes because that would be an easy thing to check. So I might check their ingredients, the steps, the vocabulary and the grammar that they use in the recipe. And then I like to add a little section on the group work because it uses a lot of collaborative activities. So I might want to check how they're getting along with their groups. But at the bottom, I have some of your other ideas as well. So you can also just use self-evaluation. You can have them just give participation points for participating in the activity, or you can just use formative assessments for later activities. So you don't have to have a formal evaluation for every time you use an experiential learning activity. But definitely here I would create a nice rubric there. Okay, let's take a look at the next slide. Now, I know some of you are thinking, well, I have a large class of 50 students and I don't want to buy food for all my students, or my school doesn't allow us to use food in class. So how might you adapt this activity if you couldn't involve food in your class?
What are some ways you could adapt this activity, everybody, if you couldn't involve actual food in the classroom? That might be a scenario that many of us find ourselves in, especially if we're doing some online learning. Okay, great. Eva says we could do a video, some drawings, pictures. Great ideas. Let's see. Role play, drawing, plastic items of food. That's a nice idea. Vegetable toys. Great. You could even maybe make flashcards of the food items. Great. Wonderful responses, everybody. Thanks for sharing.
Great. Yeah, again, you guys took some of my ideas. Let's take a look at the next slide. So one idea I had was to have students act out the recipes without using real food. So as you guys mentioned, you could use pictures or you could use realia with the plastic food instead. Just having them act out the recipe is still having them do it. So they're still using the imperative verbs to give directions and to follow the recipe. Another idea, I don't know if you're like me during this difficult situation, I've been doing a lot more classes on Zoom lately and not so many face-to-face classes. So I wouldn't even be able to bring in the food to class in the first place. If you're like me and you're doing more of those digital classes, you could always have the students create a cooking video outside of class, maybe to post on a class website and to share with each other. So maybe they cook a dish for their families, they make a little cooking video to share. So that could be a great option for digital classes to assign it as more of a homework. They're still getting the experience of making that recipe. Okay, let's take a look at the next slide. So we've seen the example with the restaurant role play and the shopping at a market role play. We've gone through the example with the recipe, creating a full lesson plan. I'm going to show you one more example of how to create the lesson plan. Okay, so again, we do prepare, do, reflect, and apply. But when I do the lesson plan, I'm going to start with the second step, do, because in experiential learning, experience is the most important part. So you want to start by creating a really good activity for your class. Let's take a look at the next slide. So if I'm starting from the grammar, I want to think about the grammar point. How is it used in real life? In which situations would people use this grammar point? So here I've chosen be going to, the verb tense. Some real life uses include future plans, making predictions, or expressing that something is about to happen. So among those, I just choose one. I can use other activities later to teach other uses. So here I chose future plans, and then I need to create an activity that's going to use this grammar point. So I decided making a group travel itinerary. So in groups, students will plan a trip. Let's see what that might look like. So here I put the students in groups, maybe of 3 or 4. I tell them they're going to take a 3-day trip, and they're going to fill out the information for their trip and be ready to share their answers with the class. So I have the questions here with going to. So where are you going to go? What are you going to pack? What are you going to do there? How are you going to get there? Where are you going to stay? So in groups, the students will have to plan the trip and then present it either to a group, another group if my class is quite large, or maybe to the whole class. Let's take a look at the next step. So let's pause and reflect. What makes this activity an experiential learning activity?
All right, what do you think, everybody? What makes this an experiential learning activity? We are doing the travel itinerary here. What do you think? Let's see. What are some nice responses? Socialization. Students can connect it to real life. It could happen in real life. Experience-based from Sunbeam. School trip from Yasu. Maybe that's a great way to apply this. Activity for students. They will participate while packing their stuff from Farul. A lot of problem solving from Zied. And it makes students excited from Christine. What do you think, Amanda? Nice responses.
Yeah, of course. Let's take a look at the next slide. You guys got it exactly right. So remember, experiential learning means learning by doing. In this case, students are using English to create a real travel itinerary in groups. And as you mentioned, if you do a school trip, if they plan it out, that could be even more real life. Okay, so now I have my activity. I'm going to go back to the first step and think about how to prepare the students to do their travel plans. So let's take a look at the next slide. So now I want to think about what students will need to know to complete the travel plan. And I want to prepare some pre-activity materials or practice. So for the group travel itinerary, we might read some travel brochures or look at some example travel itineraries. We might review travel vocabulary and grammar, or we might read about a trip someone is planning to take. So I'm going to show you just one example of this last one. Let's take a look at the next slide. First, I always like to have the warm-up. So here I have just some questions for the students to discuss with a partner to make them start thinking about their last vacation. And then number 3, they start thinking about what they need to think about when planning a trip, and they're going to write down some 5 things. So that will hopefully lead into the group activity. This is also a great time to tell the students about the objective so that they're ready and motivated to participate in the activity. Let's take a look at the next slide. Okay, so now after the warm-up, I might give students a reading text like this one that has the grammar in it. So you can see many examples of going to. And then I might have the students read it and then answer some comprehension questions. We might discuss why they use going to, or we might underline it or circle it so the focus on that grammar as well. Okay, after they've done the preparation, we have the warm-up and the reading activity. We've made our plan, which is to create a travel itinerary in groups and present it to the class. Now I want to think about steps 3 and 4, reflect and apply. Let's take a look at the next slide. So after that group travel activity, I'm going to add a review or reflection task to help students solidify the grammar point. So in this case, I might review some grammar. I could have them reflect on what went well or what didn't go well, connect it to their past experiences traveling, or have them think about the new language they learned. I'm going to just show you an example of the first one on the next slide. So maybe after the activity, after they've done the presentations, I might remind them that, okay, when we're speaking, it's common to use contractions or shortened forms. So we might review contractions, we might talk about in spoken English, instead of going to, I can use gonna, and we may have some examples from the presentations. After that, in their groups, maybe they could practice changing some of their original sentences to contractions and using this shortened form. Okay, now we have prepared them, we did the activity, and we reflected. The last step is apply. Let's take a look at the next slide. So to apply, I want to link the classroom learning to the real world. I could have students reflect on how they could use it in real life, have them apply it to a different situation, or ask them to plan what they will do in a real life situation. Let's take a look at an example of the second one. Yes. Okay, so I might ask the students to write down 3 other situations in which they could use be going to with a partner. Then we might share as a class and put some ideas on the board. So here the students have thought of other uses of be going to, such as for weekly plans, plans for after class, or talking about the weather. Hopefully then they'll be able to transfer the grammar they learned in this class to those other situations because they've already thought about it. Oh, when I talk about the weather, I can use going to. Let's take a look at the next slide. Now I have my whole lesson ready. I have objectives. Students will be able to use going to make and present a travel itinerary in groups. Materials on my reading worksheet may be internet for research in their groups. And I have all the 4 stages here. So although I started by preparing stage 2, then I go back and think about preparation, reflect, and apply. Now I have my full lesson plan there. Let's take a look at the next slide. Okay, so maybe you think this activity is a little easy for your class. How might you adapt this activity to make it more challenging for advanced learners?
What do you think, everybody? We always have to think about ways to adapt our materials for our classrooms. How would you maybe adapt this for advanced learners? What do you think? Okay, maybe you have them figure out the differences between going to and will rather than sharing that information. Great idea. Talking about more abstract topics from Porcus, great idea. Adding more details, students could add more details. Kathy says they could act as tour guides. They could compare travel plans, that's great, kind of bringing in some more critical thinking skills with comparing and contrasting. They could be a group, and more advanced students could be a group leader. And maybe integrate more skills from Edgar. Wonderful, thanks so much for sharing, everybody.
Yeah, excellent suggestions. Here are 2 ideas that I had. So you could have students create and present maybe a more complicated itinerary that has more details or more different vocabulary. Again, maybe you're like me and you're not teaching as many face-to-face classes during this time. So for digital students, they might create an online brochure or an online advertisement that can be shared in your class website. And that would be a great use of technology as well. Okay, we're almost out of time, so let's take a look at the next slide. It's time to quickly review. So from this presentation, we learned that experiential learning means learning by doing. And we talked about 4 phases. So we start with prepare, do, reflect, and apply. When I'm making my lesson plan, I'm going to start by thinking about the experience or the activity. Then I can go back and prepare pre-activity materials or practice, and then add a review or reflection task and help them link activity to the real world after it's over. Again, remember to adapt and modify activities to fit your class so that it will work with your teaching context and with your students. Okay, next slide. Okay, which activity will you try using with experiential learning cycle? It can be something from the webinar or your own idea.
Great, which of these activities will you use in your classroom, everyone? We'd love to hear from you. As we're waiting for that, I'll just share a couple of nice comments from Nurs. We had, I love this session. You are a really cheerful giver by sharing your expertise. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
And we have a nice, the actual experience makes learning concrete from Anna. Very nice.
Excellent. You got the main point of the session.
Yes, and Christy, I think, did as well. She wants to incorporate prepare, do, reflect. Very nice. All activities were nice. Wonderful slides and lecture. Which one of these activities would you share? I think a lot of people want to incorporate all of them, and definitely the framework for sure that you have shared with us today. So thank you.
Yes, definitely. Even if you don't use this activity, you can just use the framework to develop your own lessons as well, adding that reflection and application at the end. All right. Let's go to the, I don't know if we have time for questions, but that's the next slide.
I think we're out of time, unfortunately, for questions.
Great. So here are some references that I used. If you're interested in learning more about experiential learning, I would recommend all of these. And I think we're going to share the slides later as well.
Exactly. Thank you so much, Amanda, for that wonderful session on experiential learning and bringing grammar to life.